All right, well, it looks like it's coming on 12:03, and we already have 25 people. So why don't we get started? I'd like to introduce Dr. Jeremy Smith, who I think everyone on the call knows. Dr. Smith is one of our most talented leaders in the Department of Medicine, one of our most talented educators, just a partner, a friend, a mentor, I think, to everyone. So thank you, Jeremy, for talking to us today in our leadership series about public speaking. I can't think of anyone better to teach us about the topic. So please take it away.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for that warm introduction. And let me start our discussion today by saying that I have some material that I will share with you, but I definitely want this to be an open conversation. And so what I would love is if you have any questions, or if you have a challenge that's come up for you, or you want to clarify anything, or you wanted a little advice, just take a time out and ask the question. What I'm going to present to you is just my idea of what we could discuss, but please feel free to bring up anything that you want to get us into. And sometimes tangents are the best way to learn something new for everybody. So tangents are okay. All right, folks. So I am going to share my screen. Okay. Jane, you're the only person that can see. Can you give me a thumbs up if you see my screen? Perfect. Okay. And what we're going to talk about today is a version of communication skills that really relates to public speaking and techniques of communication as it relates to leadership. So I teach a lot of stuff about how to teach, but what I'm really trying to focus us on here today is communication skills as it relates to leadership and administrative interactions and interpersonal interactions in general. And so the first question is, who cares? Like, why are we spending an hour? We're all doctors, right? Like, what does it matter? So I am going to, this is not rhetorical. I'd like to hear someone chime in and talk about why, well, maybe why you joined this particular session of all the sessions you could have joined. Why do you think it matters to talk about communication skills in the world of academic medicine?
People should feel free to unmute also.
I joined because I've learned something every single time Jeremy's talked before, and he's helped me improve my communication with learners on the wards. So I thought I might learn something else today.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nicole. Spoken from one of our best teachers.
Same thing from my side also. I've taken Jeremy's a couple of lectures and classes, and I've always I've learned something.
Sandesh, did I see you playing tennis the other night?
Yes, you did.
You guys don't understand how good Sandesh is at tennis.
No, that's not true.
Hey, I saw you. I watched you serve, and I've never seen so much slice on a first serve in my life. So everyone out there, just beware if Sandesh asks you to play tennis. He's going to win and you're going to lose. Okay, so let us, as always, we want to focus ourselves on what it is we're trying to accomplish. This is a waste of an hour if you are not walking out of this doing something differently than you did when you came in. And so here's what I would hope that you could do once we're done today. I would like you to be able to employ eye contact, use of voice, gestures, pauses, and avoidance of non-words to maximize your ability to communicate effectively. So we're going to be very behavioral today. We're really going to drill down. We're not going to be abstract. We're going to talk about specific, concrete, executable behaviors that you can do this afternoon to improve your ability to communicate effectively. And so I think we have to acknowledge before we even get into this fact. Right? I mean, it's always scary, whether you're at one of your national meetings, giving a talk in front of 500 people, or even if you're sitting in a conference room with 7 other people on your team, and all of a sudden at one moment, all eyes are fixated on you because it's your turn to say something. We have to acknowledge that no matter what the scenario is, when you're on the stage, it's scary and there's normal anxiety. And so part of what I want to share with you today is how to tap that anxiety, that normal human anxiety, to actually improve the way that you communicate. So I'll get to that in a moment. So it's important to first talk about what not to do and just to have a contrast about what we're trying to avoid. I'm going to show you a video, and now the only person I can currently see is Nicole. So Nicole, I've had occasional trouble with the audio coming through on these. So I want you to give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you, as I load this, if you see, or if you have any trouble with this video, if you can't see it or hear it. Not yet. Okay, so Nicole, can you see it? Can you see our guy there? Okay. Now I'm going to hit the audio, and you give me a thumbs down if it's not working for you.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the Great Depression, passed the the tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression.
Okay. So I think we all probably at one point in our career, maybe we were post-call, maybe stuff was going on at home, and we were Ferris Bueller's teacher in the way that we communicated. And so, yes, this is what we want to avoid. This is what I want to push all of us away from and help us to communicate more effectively. And so let's start with specifics. So one of the things that I do in my spare time is I go and watch some of our faculty teach, and I'll sit sometimes in the conference room on the GMed wards and just do a little coaching of our teachers. And I will sit there in the conference room and watch the teacher, the faculty member, teach the team. And, there's 5 or 6 residents and medical students in that room. And one of the things I do when I'm watching that happen, as I'm trying to evaluate the effectiveness of the teacher, is I'm watching the teacher's eyes. And what do you think, again, this is non-rhetorical, what do you think I observe when I watch the average teacher teach? What do you think they're doing with their eyes as they're communicating? Where do you think their eyes are landing?
On the computer.
So on the computer, okay, that is a chronic GMed problem. It's probably happening on cardiology too and everywhere else. The pull of the computer. Okay. When they're looking at the learners, do you think that their eye contact is even or uneven? What would you guess?
Uneven.
And why?
It can be due to kind of their own angling of their body, that they kind of, like, we narrow in on a learner or two versus all, depending on the setup of the room.
Yeah, so the physical, go ahead.
Originally, I also kind of thought whether people tend to kind of, even though they might look into the audience, they look over the shoulder or over the head of the learners and not really right at them.
It's always, it can be a little nerve-wracking to be up there talking to a bunch of people. So yes, sometimes not making eye contact with anybody is our unconscious mechanism. Sometimes the physical setup, as Shobi said, is such that it's just not easy. Sometimes there's actually physically something blocking us from the learner. And so part of what your goal should be when you're about to embark on any kind of communication with a group, whether you're teaching, like I'm talking about now, or whether you're doing something administrative, you're with a team in a room, is look at lines of sight and adjust yourself in your chair so that you are facing everybody as evenly as possible and there's no one blocking. Here's one more thought. One other thing I observe is that when they do have lines of sight and when they are making eye contact with the learners, it's still not even. It's still not even. And so my question for you is this: what type of learner do you think enjoys the most eye contact from the teacher?
The one who's engaged?
Exactly. The one who's engaged. Great answer. The one who is most enthusiastically engaged. The one who is using nonverbal skills to demonstrate their interest. That's who we gravitate to. That's who we're looking at. You know who we're not looking at? The people who are disengaged. The people who need us to pay attention to them. That's who we look at the least. That's what I see consistently when by the way, I'm not immune to this myself. When I teach, I do the same thing. This is natural human behavior. We look at people who are interested in us, right? We don't look at people who are not interested. And yet the people who need us to engage them are getting the least amount of eye contact. And so we have to redouble our efforts to make eye contact and engage those people who are already half out the door. And that's hard. And let me tell you from my own personal experience, this eye contact business, I mean, it's all flying under the radar, right? It's happening totally unconsciously. And so my message to you is be conscious of it, be mindful of it. And every so often, this is what I do, every so often when I'm doing in-person communication anyway, I am making myself aware, where are my eyes? And a lot of the time when I make myself aware, I quickly realize I'm not being even, and then I can make myself be even. You would not have a dinner party and look only at a few people at the table and not everyone else. So the same should be equally true when you're at work. These things are always, it's a little unsure what to do with them when we're talking, and yet they can be a very powerful way to express energy. No one, I think, can teach this better than Ricky Bobby.
First of all, where did you learn to drive like that? Car Henry. Can you speak up, Ricky? The car? That was real good. I felt like I was on stage. And, I'm not sure what to do with my hands. It'd be good just to hold them down by your side. Yeah, great. Well, we were real happy with what was going on. And, at the end of the day, you know, you like everything. But... Yeah, okay, everything's fine. Thanks. Great job. You did a good job in the car. Hey, Bobby, the folks to be reckoned with possibly in the near future.
Okay. So those would be some examples of perhaps what not to do with your hands. But the general rule of thumb when it comes to public speaking in general is that the more you can express yourself with gestures, the more effective and engaging you can be. And I think I have another video here I'm going to show you. So that was the bad. Let me show you the good. This video is of one of the master communicators of all time, ex-President Bill Clinton. And what I want to show you in this clip is I want you to look at his gestures. Look at how he uses his arms and his hands to express his points. And then I want you to get a sense of how that feels to you. What impact does it have on you that he's using gestures as he communicates?
Consider this. What would you do if you had this problem? Somebody says, oh, we got a big debt problem. We got to reduce the debt. So what's the first thing you say we're going to do? Well, to reduce the debt, we're going to have another $5 trillion in tax cuts, heavily weighted to upper income people. So we'll make the debt hole bigger before we start to get out of it. Now, when you say, what are you going to do about this $5 trillion you just added on? They say, oh, we'll make it up by eliminating loopholes in the tax code. So then you ask, well, which loopholes and how much? You know what they say? See me about that after the election. I'm not making it up. That's their position. See me about that after the election.
Okay. So let's hear from some of our participants. What did you observe there and what impact did it have on you?
I thought the timing was just right, and like the amount of gestures, like it was really, when he was making a point, there was a that was a fitting gesture, and it was not constant move or whatever. And the kind of gesture also did fit the whatever point, like the content of what he was doing.
Yeah, that's great, Natasha. That's exactly right. He's sort of efficient with his gestures. He's not just doing them for no reason. He's using them to demonstrate the point. And I think a lot of people would agree that it sort of feels like he's telling a story. And this is part of why Bill Clinton is so good at what he does. And so this is not something that comes naturally to a lot of people. And it's okay if this isn't something that comes naturally to you. I think the goal is to see if you can move your needle a little bit and see if you can begin to take your hands away from just a totally static position and actually occasionally use them to make a point. Sometimes there are speakers where the only thing moving is their lips. And that just presents a challenge for people listening, especially if it's more of a lecture or something that's more of a monologue than a dialogue. It's hard to stay engaged when nothing dynamic is happening in front of you. So then we come to these pauses and non-words. And what I want to define for you is what we mean by non-words. Non-words, these are three of the most common, you know. And I have an example of that I was just in my bathroom listening to NPR one morning, and I heard this story come on. And it was such a good example of non-words that I had to go back and capture it and play it for you. So what I want you to appreciate here is not just hearing those non-words come out, but I want you to get a feeling of what it does for the authority of the speaker in your own mind as a listener when that happens. So this is somewhere else where I've had trouble with the audio coming through. So someone just holler if you don't hear this normally.
We've called up Cami Chavis, a professor of law who directs the criminal justice program at Wake Forest University's law school. Good morning.
Good morning.
What do you think about when you see two cases like this?
So it's very interesting that we have two cases, particularly, the same area. No one disputes that police officers have an incredibly difficult job, but it's a pretty common call to receive that, hey, there's some suspicious behavior here. And we know what happened in the Jefferson case. The officer went to the home, suspicious call. This is a very frequent occurrence, and to officers receive training.
Okay, so what did you guys think of that? What did you notice, and how did it come across to you?
I think I probably wouldn't have noticed the uhs or the ums if we weren't particularly paying attention to it. It seemed like it flowed with all of what she was saying. And then they were in place of a point where she could have paused and just paused.
Yeah. A lot of this is, I think it's not, I think it's rare that any of us will say, wow, they're saying a lot. And I think what I want to draw your attention to is that there may be some unconscious impact of those words when you use them frequently that maybe you're not even as a listener fully aware of. But I think it's safe to say that it takes away from how articulate you are when you pepper your speech with a lot of noises that aren't really conveying anything. So what is Nicole, what would you think is the reason that we do this? Like, why do we make those sounds? Like, what's triggering that?
It might be that you are pausing to think of what to say next, and you don't want to have a pause because those feel uncomfortable.
That's exactly right. So what happens, I think, in our brain, again, unconsciously, is that we arrive at a moment where we're not exactly sure of the syntax of what we're about to say. And so we need to collect just momentarily our thoughts to figure out how we're going to put those words in the order we want them. And then your brain feels like, but I can't make no sound. That's weird. And so your brain makes this sound and it just says, and like, it's funny to me, like if some Martian came down and like watched us doing this, he'd be like, why are you doing that? Why do you make that noise? Why don't you just be silent for a moment until you find the words? But we feel like we have to like fill the space with some noise because because it feels awkward to us to have a pause. And so it's important to understand the etiology of this because therein lies the solution. And if you understand that the reason you do this is because you're trying to hold a little time, then the solution is to force yourself to be comfortable with a pause. And the second thing, by the way, is becoming aware of this because most of us aren't aware. And when I learned a lot of this public speaking stuff, I went to this course outside of Chicago where they taught business people how to do public speaking, like mostly salespeople. And they would snap at us every time the facilitators heard us say and that made you very quickly aware of how often you did it. And by being aware of it, once you're mindful of it and conscious of it, then you can extinguish it. But it's not easy. Believe me, it's hard. And it always is a little bit, I want to say, scary or awkward to sit there with a pause. And so that takes me to the corollary point here, which is pauses are not only the thing that allows you to avoid non-words. Pauses are actually potentially a very potent, effective public speaking tool. And it can allow you to create an environment where the point that you just made really sinks in. And it takes a little bit of time to get used to it, that behavior, and to incorporate it into your behavioral repertoire and to feel comfortable with it. So again, I want to show you a video of someone who does this extremely effectively. And I want you to pay attention to what you're seeing here, particularly with pauses. So this is Barack Obama. He's talking about something much more important than what we're talking about today. And he's upset and he's conveying the power of his message somewhat, among other things, by use of pauses. So I want you to get a sense of how long he waits in between his sentences. And then also I want you to feel how that feels, like what impact that does have on you as a listener.
Where does this stop? The Orlando killer, one of the San Bernardino killers, the Fort Hood killer, they were all U.S. citizens. Are we going to start treating all Muslim Americans differently? We're going to start subjecting them to special surveillance? We're going to start discriminating against them because of their faith? We've heard these suggestions during the course of this campaign. Do Republican officials actually agree with this? Because that's not the America we want.
So you get the sense there, I mean, you could hear a pin drop in between what he was saying, and he didn't raise his voice at all, but the emotion is evident. And again, the power of what he's saying is palpable because of those long, long pauses. So again, what we talk about is probably not going to be as important as what he's describing right now in that discussion. But just to take it down a notch, I mean, even if you're talking about if you're getting to the most important part of your pitch, let's say, when you're in a meeting, then that might be a moment where you might insert a pause. People who are half paying attention, maybe they're on their phone or they're jotting notes or whatever. People who are half paying attention, when you insert a pause, everyone looks up. You have everyone's attention for a moment because it's unusual, right? People don't expect it. It alters the cadence of what's happening. And so people who are half stepping out mentally will re-engage when you insert a pause. It can be a very effective tool. And then what we do with our
Can I add something to that?
Oh, please.
I was just going to add, I think when you do a PowerPoint presentation and so you're presenting with a PowerPoint, I think it's very helpful to make these pauses between slides. Like, and you like it never bothers anyone, but it really helps to have like to not jump over and like start a new topic. But like I consciously taught myself to make pauses between slides, particularly when I start on the results slide or when I come to the conclusion slide. And I really wait like 5 seconds or so before I start talking again to make that point that now something important is going to come, and it somehow works. So I was really like, I was surprised, but it's like kind of an easy thing to teach yourself because you can control it quite well. You know, I'm shifting to the next slide now. Okay, I wanted to wait, and now I talk. And so I think that was kind of a way where I was able to teach myself that pretty easily.
Natasha, thanks for a really insightful point. In fact, I'll add one thing to that. So when you're in the middle of a PowerPoint talk, hit the letter B on your screen, on your PowerPoint presentation. It makes the screen go blank. And I have been in, I remember distinctly being at our national meeting, SGIM, and we had a plenary speaker who used this so effectively. You know, there's like 1,000 people in that audience at the plenary talk. And there's one person on a stage and there's a big PowerPoint slide up above. And when she did that, hit the B and made it go blank, it was like every eye in the auditorium all of a sudden pivots to the person speaking because they have nothing else to look at. So that can be a really effective way if you're, as Natasha said, if you're arriving at a result or a conclusion or a big caveat or anything that you think is powerful, hit that B, get the slides to shut off temporarily, and everyone will look right at you and you'll have them again for just a moment. So thanks for that. Thanks for that tip. So, okay, we're talking about vocal variety. And so this is the opposite of Ben Stein. This is the opposite of Ferris Bueller's Teacher, where you can affect the dynamics of the atmosphere by what you do with your voice. And so I want to show you a couple of examples of this. One is this thing called upspeak, which is defined as an upward inflection in your voice at the tail end of a sentence. And it can sometimes interfere with your ability to convey authority when you do that. So again, I found a clip of it here and I want you to listen to it and again, see how it makes you feel in terms of the authority of the person who is speaking.
Overdoing it is a concern for some. Jessica Lucas is with the addiction counseling group Prevention Specialists of Missouri. She says allowing and even encouraging people to drink too much is irresistible for some and can be dangerous.
As a society, we've been taught to get the most out of our money. And so it encourages unlimited drinking. And anytime you have more than 5 drinks in an hour, it's considered binge drinking, which is detrimental to health.
And then the other clip I have here is simply vocal variety. And so you'll see what you're going to listen to here is an interaction between an interviewer who works for, I think this is also NPR, and then an interviewee. The interviewee is a journalist. He's not a public speaker. This is not what he does. He's a writer. And so he, and yet the person who's doing the interview is a professional. And so I want you to get a sense of the dichotomy here and how different these two people use their voices. And again, maybe which one you'd want to keep talking to.
Will Hobson is one of the Washington Post reporters who broke this story. In terms of Dan Snyder's actions,
We're having a hard time hearing that one, I think.
and also that Snyder hired.
Okay, hang on. I have a backup plan.
Will Hobson is one of the Washington Post reporters who broke this story. Will, in terms of Dan Snyder's actions, what exactly?
Can't hear it? Okay. Let me turn it up a little bit more.
It started off okay, and then it sort of just faded away.
Okay, I'm gonna try it one more time and I'll just try it once more. And Nicole, give me a thumbs up or thumbs down as we start here.
Well, Hobson is with the Washington Post reporters.
Maybe try go midway. It seemed like it picked up, it was going to pick up again. If you can advance it.
Okay, let me just keep playing it and see what happens.
I think it's the high pass filter on Zoom noise reduction.
You know what I think it is? The person on the audio is so monotonous that the PowerPoint just can't even recognize it as human voice. So okay, we'll skip that clip, but the distinction that we see in that clip, I'll just tell you, is someone who's projecting a lot of energy and enthusiasm and has a lot of variability in their voice inflection versus someone who's speaking very monotonously. And again, I just want to say, as I think I would say about all of these points, each of us have a natural tendency to be on one part of the spectrum here. And so I don't want anyone to walk away thinking that they have to go from one end of the spectrum to the other. You have to maybe be aware of what your natural tendencies are. And if you even move yourself 10 or 20% in one direction, that's a victory. And one way you might assess that or gauge that for yourself is, this is always a little scary, but at some point when you're talking for whatever reason, take out your phone and go to the audio app and record yourself and listen to it later. And a lot of people find that unpleasant, but there is probably no better way to learn about your own tendencies than to listen to yourself.
Well, Hobson is one of the Washington Post reporters.
Hey, Jeremy, can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
So I want to ask about a common, to me, it seems like a verbal tick, but some educators use it as a way of checking in. So like when I was learning how to publicly speak, people would talk about not using, and kind of like leaning into the audience and checking in. Now, a lot of people use the word right. So it's like, because we're working with patients right, and we're concerned about how they feel right. And, does that fall into the tick realm, or does that fall into the checking in realm? And how can we avoid using the same phrase repeatedly so it's more checking in?
I think I would argue that it's only falling into the checking in realm if you are following it up with a pause where you actually check in. I think that 99% of the time when I hear that word right coming at the end of a sentence, it's a non-word. It doesn't really convey any meaning. And I think if you buy the argument that using extra words that don't convey meaning takes away from how articulate you are, then I would argue that you probably should stifle that tendency to use the word right at the end of a sentence. I hear a lot on cable news for whatever reason. I know exactly what you're talking about.
And the other, just to follow up on, is the upspeak, which seems to be really common now. And as Dr. Schnapp pointed out, it's even more common among female speakers than among male speakers. And to me, it kind of detracts from the authority, and it kind of, I did use an it shows a lack of confidence. But maybe it's so common now that that's just the way people speak, and I'm being old school. What do you think?
I am not I think that's a great point to raise. And I think I don't have any more authority in answering that question than anybody else does. So I'd love to hear from the group, like, what do people think about that? Do people feel like that's something that is acceptable and is okay? Or how does it feel to you when you hear it?
It feels to me as though the person is questioning their own words.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
When you go up at the end of the sentence, it sounds like a question. Like a question? Like a question.
I think that one counterpoint or critique is that people kind of point out that if it is something that's more common in female pattern speech or in more in women, and also things like vocal fry have also kind of come under fire, that it's problematic if you kind of automatically say that the way women speak is wrong. They should speak more like men.
That's such a great point.
I still think it undermines the confidence because sounds like a question. So I still would encourage women not to minimize their use of upspeak unless you are asking a question.
Yeah, those are great comments. And I think for each of us, we have to answer that ourselves. I mean, there is no ultimate arbiter. This is not something we can objectively say is right or wrong. You have to get a sense of what you think it conveys when it happens. So the last thing that I want to talk about with respect to public speaking is really, let me put it this way. If there's only one thing that you remember from the entire hour we have together today, it's this: the single word energy. Because if you just concentrate on that, everything else follows. The gestures follow if you're more energetic. The vocal variety improves. The facial expression gets better. And the overall energy of the room improves if you summon that up and express it as you talk. So this is where the normal nervousness that you might have when you're about to start talking in front of a large group of people can actually work for you. You can tap into that and use that nervousness to bring up your energy level. And it's almost impossible to have too much energy. Almost. Is that coming through? No. Oh, shoot. You guys, this is such a good clip. Okay. This is the downside of Zoom. This guy, if you YouTube it, Phil Davidson, he is absolutely over the top. So I found the one example where it's possible to have too much energy, and he frightens the audience. I think he's a political guy who's running for office who just goes over the top. So let me just skip that then and summarize. That really wasn't that important anyway. That was just funny. What I want to summarize for you, though, is these skills that we've talked about, and then we're going to do a little practicing. So again, the skills that we discussed: being mindful of where your eyes are and trying to do your best to make sure that you are being even with your eye contact among all listeners, including and especially those who may not be that engaged. Using your voice effectively, thinking about having variability in the inflection of your voice, trying to put some of your talk into your hands and using gestures, as you saw Bill Clinton do, using effectively pauses at moments of high impact to collect the attention of the audience all at once and to drive home the power of the point that you're making. And then being aware when you use non-words and trying to extinguish that behavior to help you come across as more articulate. So we are now going to transition, but I want to pause here before we do that and ask if anyone has any questions about what we covered or any challenges that you've come up with in this domain that you wanted to maybe chat about for a bit. Yes, please.
So I don't think we touched upon pace or speed. That's something I struggle with. Sometimes when I'm nervous, I tend to speak fast. But I don't know if it is too fast or like, what do you recommend? How do you train yourself to pace yourself and not speak too fast or too slow for the audience?
Okay, that's a great question. Let me ask the audience that. Does anyone have any strategies that they've tried for the pace if they're speaking too fast?
When I'm consenting patients and their eyes glaze over, I assume I'm going into auctioneer mode, but that doesn't work on the large scale.
I actually practice and time myself.
Yeah, I also did the pausing between slides trick for that one. I think that also helped in giving yourself some pace, even though you kind of tend to fall into the pattern to talk more quickly while you're talking, you kind of can break it up with making pauses. So I tried that, although you kind of want to slow down your full like pattern, but it does help in like initially teaching yourself.
And I have almost never heard somebody who speaks too slowly giving a talk. So my advice is, I'm sure you're speaking too fast. And whatever pace for all of us, if I get up there, I speak faster than I was planning in my practice talks as well. So just recognize that.
So when in doubt, slow it down. I think for me personally, I try to use pauses to help me. I speak too fast. It's been a chronic problem of mine. And one thing that helps me personally is to insert more pauses. And then I've heard this technique that I don't use, but I've heard as a technique for this, which is to very subtly emphasize the final syllable of the word. And that kind of forces you to articulate that last bit of the word, which is where people usually chop if they're going too fast. So that's another technique you can think about.
And just to follow up to that, one thing that I have tried is like using animation and like making each sentence appear on the slide so that you are slowing yourself down. But then on the counter argument I've heard is it's better to have everything on so that people can read your slide in addition to hearing you speak. And I don't know where you fall or where the group feels is, what strategy is better in terms of doing PowerPoints and pacing yourself.
Well, yeah, that's a great point, Priyanka. I think that what I've always taught there is the first technique. So this is called build sequencing, which is defined as each bullet only appearing when you get to that bullet. And to me, the rationale for that is that it's just what you said, actually. If you put up 5 bullets, the natural human inclination is to start reading. And if I am talking about bullet number 1 and it's important, and you're reading bullet 3, 4, and 5 because it's right in front of you, then by definition, you can't be having your full attention on my words. So to me, I think that having each bullet appear only when you start talking about that bullet forces people to keep their attention only on what you're saying when you're saying it. And furthermore, when you have it appear, then there's a very small visual change that happens that focuses their attention on that bullet that you're about to start talking about. Now, I think you can go too far with this, no question. And there's, you have the animation fly in or do a flip or explode. I mean, all those things that you've sometimes seen, I think it's safe to say are to be avoided. The only animation that I ever use is the one that says appear. And I think anything else, you're on thin ice. Is that fair enough? Okay. Who else has a question or a comment or something else about any of these public speaking techniques?
I had a comment/question in the spirit of trying to continue this discussion to avoid time to practice all of these in front of one another. I've noticed one thing I really admire about you, Jeremy, is your use of humor in speaking. And that doesn't come as easily to all of us. And I'm wondering, I think you do it exceptionally well. And I'm wondering whether you do that for the benefit of yourself, and does it help to kind of, sort of just tone things down and channel energy appropriately? Is it for the audience? And lastly, is it something you use all the time? Are there times we shouldn't be using that? Just wondering if you could touch on that technique that I think you have mastered.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind of you. Well, first of all, I've seen it read and heard people say many times that humor is very risky when you're in a high stakes situation. And so I think that I would first answer that by saying, anytime you are inserting humor into a presentation of any kind, you've got to be very, very careful about how you're doing it. I think that as far as me personally, I think one thing I try to aspire to, maybe that's the best way to say it, is that I think any presentation is more enjoyable when you're having fun. And so I think that I do make a conscious effort to be sort of as lighthearted as I can, because I think it creates a positive energy for the presentation. I don't like plan jokes that I say in the middle of the talk or anything. I think that's beyond my capacity. But I guess what I would say, Jane, is that, let me answer it in a different way, and this will be my last comment before others speak. I think the best way to be the most effective you can be when you're in a public speaking role is to be yourself. And the more natural you are, the better you're going to come across. And this is why, I didn't really talk about this, but this is why people often encourage storytelling as in any kind of presentation, whether it's a teaching presentation or anything else. And I have seen this many, many times when I coach our grand round speakers, when they start telling a story, whether I encourage them to do it or whether they're already just incorporating that naturally. But when they start telling a story, it often is like a different person starts speaking. And the person who's telling the story is like engaging and interesting. And you're like, you can't wait to hear more of the story. And it's because the person has moved from like the professional, I'm just telling the facts, to like their natural, normal self. So I guess I would just summarize by saying, if humor doesn't come naturally to you as a person, then an equally effective thing is to make it personal in any way that you can. And that often can be very, very effective and very, very engaging for the listener. Now, what do others think about that?
I appreciated you contrasting humor from just having fun, because I agree with you, that whole energy thing and really just having a good time is super important.
And I like your point about not forcing it, because I have seen forced practice jokes fall flat in front of a big audience, and that can be embarrassing sometimes.
And I'll echo what Jeremy says. I think go with your personality. I use humor a lot because that's my go-to, it's my go-to defense mechanism as well. And I was going to say I wouldn't use humor at funerals, but I actually have, reflecting back, and it really actually helped me, provide a eulogy. But it is part of my personality as well.
Thanks for that. And I just actually, Lynn, if I could follow up with you just for a moment, I wondered if you having had the experience in leadership that you've had, whether there's anything else that you would sort of add to the group or summarize in terms of lessons learned for communication among leaders.
Well, I think all of the points you make are valid and really useful. The point about, and what Priya brought up about speed is really important, because I've seen people on the big stage, the biggest mistake is going way too fast, speeding through slides, continuing to talk about a slide as they're transitioning to the next slide as deadly. And then the other deadly sin I've seen is having a talk that is too long for your allotted time frame. And then when you're told, oh, you've got 3 minutes left, they just speed it up as opposed to cutting to the chase.
Yeah.
So being respectful of the time, assuming that you will go over. Nobody ever complained that a talk was too short.
That's true. It's interesting. We switched our, so the CME conferences that we do, these regional CME conferences that we run, we switched them from 50-minute lectures to 30-minute lectures. And the response a few years ago, we did that. The response has been overwhelmingly positive. People just don't want to hear more than 30 minutes. And so cutting your communication to short, concise, digestible bites is always a good idea. Whoever originally centuries ago came up with the idea of the 60-minute lecture had not read anything about like human attention span and adult learning theory.
There's that joke, right? If you want me to give an hour talk, I can do it tomorrow. A half-hour talk next week, a 10-minute talk in a month.
Yeah, I like that. But okay, let me do this instead. The homework that you have for a later time is to take out your iPhone or your Android or whatever and put on that app that allows you to audio record and just record yourself all by yourself. I mean, without anyone knowing it, but do it when you're going to be talking in front of people and just record it. And then in the privacy of your own home later on, listen to it. And it may be tough to listen to yourself, but the goal for all of these sessions, what Jim Stein's trying to do here is for us to improve ourselves, to take ourselves to the next level in all of these domains. So I would encourage you to push yourself and to make a recording of yourself and force yourself to listen to it, because your goal is to be the best, in this case, communicator that you can be. And I think there's almost no way to get better than to hear yourself do it and decide on a couple of concrete goals for yourself that you want to implement for the next time. So with that, we do still have a couple of minutes if anyone has any final questions or comments that they want to share.
I could bring up one more topic. I was thinking, since you've been talking about recording, and since the start of the pandemic, kind of everything is recorded now and accessible for everyone else later. Even this thing here is being recorded, and you may, I don't know, some people may be comfortable or not comfortable speaking up since everything is recorded. And I was wondering, in terms of like conference talks being recorded these days, and you get like, if the FNQs were also recorded, and like there may be some knowledge at this time where it's like my answer may be appropriate, but in like 3 years from now, we may know something else now, but everything is kind of recorded. Everything is going to be stored somewhere. I guess I doubt nobody's ever going to look back at a talk from 3 years ago and like tell me, oh, like, did you know that you were saying something that was completely wrong 3 years ago? Well, it was like, it may have been appropriate at that time, or sometimes you may even say something that's not right, and that like, and it's recorded. And is this something that, I don't know, like early investigators should be more worried about now that this exists, as like everything is stored everywhere? Or should I just like have the confidence and say, well, at this time point I was correct, or well, I make mistakes too, like in this situation, like you're right, and now I kind of learn better, and I know it better. Does anybody have an opinion about that?
Lynn, what are your thoughts on that?
Like what they taught us in med school. Half of what we taught is wrong. We just don't know what half is going to be wrong. I mean, whether it is a talk you've given, a paper you've written, things change over time. I would not worry so much about the record of where you live. I do think it is the responsibility of whoever is hosting those sites to clean up and remove items and content that is no longer relevant. So don't lose any sleep over it, Natasha.
Yeah, I agree, Natasha. You got enough to worry about if you're about to give a big talk. Don't worry about, 5 years from now, someone's going to look back. I've been giving talks like many people on this call for years that have been recorded. I've never once had anybody come back to me years later and say, try to call me out on something that I said years ago that was recorded.
Yeah, I guess also people just don't have time for doing that. So there's just too much material out there right now. So
yeah.
Okay. Well, let me say as we wrap up, I'm always privileged and thrilled to be able to hang out with you guys. I love everyone in the Department of Medicine. I love my job and I love my comrades. So thank you so much for joining me today, and I wish you all the best of luck with your public speaking in the future.